A mistress hanged the pregnant wife in the basement. Yes, you heard that right. Isabella was months away from bringing new life into the world when she found herself gasping for air, her swollen belly dragging her downward, her wrists chained, her cries echoing through the darkness beneath her own home. Upstairs, the sound of glasses clinking and laughter rang out, not from strangers but from the very woman her husband had chosen over her, a mistress who believed that by tightening those chains, she could erase Isabella from existence. Imagine that. A wife, carrying her husband's child, punished not by a stranger in a dark alley, but by someone welcomed inside the walls of her marriage. And yet, what nobody expected was that the millionaire himself, the man who built this house, this life, this betrayal, would one day return and break the very chains that were meant to silence her forever. How did it come to this? How did Isabella, a woman whose only crime was loving her husband and carrying his child, end up hanging in her own basement while another woman smiled at her suffering? How could a marriage filled with promises of forever collapse into a nightmare of jealousy, betrayal, and attempted murder? The answers, as you'll soon discover, are more shocking than anything you could imagine. Because what unfolded in this house would not only test the limits of love and loyalty, but would force an entire community to confront the darkness hiding behind wealth, power, and appearances. But before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Who really planned Isabella's disappearance, Vanessa or Daniel? That's the question that haunted investigators, neighbors, and even Isabella herself in the final moments she spent struggling for breath in that basement. On the surface, Vanessa appeared to be the mastermind, a mistress intoxicated by envy, a woman who couldn't stand the shadow of the wife who rightfully held Daniel's name, his fortune, and his unborn child. But whispers around the community suggested something far more complicated. Could it be that Daniel, the millionaire whose charm bought him influence and admiration, was not only aware of the plan, but quietly complicit in it? That perhaps the woman he vowed to protect was never truly safe in his presence? The tragedy of Isabella's chains was not simply about two women fighting for a man. It was about whether the man himself carried secrets darker than anyone wanted to believe. Why was Vanessa so determined to erase the wife? What could drive a woman to believe that her place in Daniel's heart and in his life would only be secured through Isabella's destruction? For many, jealousy seemed explanation enough. Isabella had what Vanessa never could: legitimacy, respect, the social power that came with being Daniel's wife. Yet when investigators probed deeper, they found signs of something more sinister: documents hidden in safety deposit boxes, traces of financial manipulation, and a secret inheritance tied directly to Isabella's unborn child. Vanessa's desperation was not merely about love, it was survival. Because if Isabella delivered Daniel's heir, Vanessa's place in his world would evaporate overnight. To Vanessa, every second Isabella's heart kept beating was another moment her own future slipped further from her grasp. And then there was Daniel, the man at the center of it all. What no one realized at first was that this basement crime could be traced back not just to passion, not just to greed, but to Daniel's past, a past still haunted by the death of his brother. For years, Daniel had hidden the details of that night, telling only fragments of the truth, burying secrets in silence. But those who knew him best remembered the shift in his eyes when the subject arose. That story of a brother gone too soon, of a tragedy whispered but never confronted, would later prove to be the missing link between Daniel's choices and Isabella's chains. Because the basement wasn't just a scene of betrayal, it was a mirror reflecting Daniel's own darkest regrets. Tonight, we uncover a story of betrayal, obsession, and a twisted game that started years before Isabella ever wore her wedding ring. What began as a love story between a wealthy businessman and a hopeful young woman would unravel into a plot so disturbing that even the police struggled to untangle who the true villain was. And as you'll see, when truth and lies collided in this mansion, the outcome would leave everyone questioning not only what happened in that basement, but why it had been set in motion long before Isabella ever stepped inside. But the first sign that something was wrong wasn't blood or bruises. It was a red dress and a diamond ring meant for someone else. To understand the chains in the basement, we must first understand Isabella. She wasn't a socialite, nor did she come from wealth. She was the daughter of a school teacher and a nurse, raised in a quiet neighborhood where family dinners were sacred and trust was never questioned. When she married Daniel, the millionaire businessman with a smile that could light up a room, she carried with her a heart full of loyalty and hope. At the time of her disappearance, Isabella was pregnant, her hand often resting gently on her belly, whispering promises of the life she was determined to give her child. Just days before the nightmare unfolded, she was planning a surprise anniversary dinner for Daniel, even choosing the menu herself, a meal meant to celebrate their love and the growing family they were about to become. In Isabella's mind, loyalty was not negotiable. It was her entire identity. Daniel, however, was a more complicated figure. Outwardly, he embodied success, a man respected at charity galas, admired in boardrooms, and envied for the empire he seemed to command effortlessly. He carried the Avery family name, a dynasty tied to generations of wealth that stretched back decades, a fortune built on land, shipping, and clever investments. But behind the polished suits and practiced charm, Daniel was weak, easily influenced, and desperate to maintain the illusion of strength. He leaned too heavily on the people around him to tell him who he was and what he should want. To Isabella, Daniel was a devoted husband, a man who held her hand during doctor's appointments, a man who kissed her forehead at night. But to those who watched closely, there was always a shadow in his life. A shadow named Vanessa. Vanessa was not just the other woman, she was something far more dangerous. With her sharp wit and striking beauty, she knew exactly how to walk into a room and command attention. Long before Isabella even realized her marriage was at risk, Vanessa had already set her sights on Daniel, not because of love but because of power. She wasn't satisfied with being a mistress hidden in the corners of Daniel's world. Vanessa wanted everything Isabella had, the legitimacy, the fortune, and the place in the dynasty, and she was willing to play the long game to get it. Behind the expensive dresses and glamorous parties was a calculating mind, one that thrived on manipulation. To Vanessa, Isabella wasn't a woman. She was an obstacle, one that had to be removed permanently. The Avery mansion itself carried its own secrets. A sprawling estate on the outskirts of town, its gleaming chandeliers and marble floors gave the illusion of perfection. Yet beneath the surface, literally beneath the ground, was a basement that few people ever entered. Built generations earlier as a storage cellar, it had since become a hidden space. A place Daniel often used to store family heirlooms and private documents. Isabella knew little of it, dismissing it as part of Daniel's world she never needed to understand. But to Vanessa, the basement was opportunity. It was seclusion. It was silence. And in the story of Isabella's disappearance, it would become a prison designed to break more than just chains. It was meant to break a woman's will. Yet even before Isabella's pregnancy, even before Vanessa's presence grew undeniable, there was a shadow over Daniel's family that few dared to speak of. Years earlier, his brother Michael had died in what was officially described as a boating accident. The story was told with hushed voices, the details vague and unsettling. Daniel carried the guilt heavily, though he rarely admitted it. And there were whispers, ones Isabella would later overhear, that Vanessa herself had been around during those years, her name tied quietly to events that never seemed to add up. Could it be that Vanessa's hand reached into the past long before Isabella ever wore her wedding ring? If so, then the basement chains were not the beginning of her story. They were only the continuation of something far older and far darker. 2 nights before Isabella vanished, she heard a voice in her home, Vanessa's voice, laughing on the phone. She's still here, but not for long. It began with a box. A small velvet box that Isabella found tucked away inside Daniel's study drawer. She hadn't been looking for it, not really. She had gone in to place a note, a handwritten card for their anniversary dinner she'd been planning. But when her hand brushed against the drawer's corner, she felt it. Soft velvet. Unmistakable. With trembling fingers, she pulled it out, expecting maybe a keepsake, perhaps even something meant for her. But when she opened it, her world collapsed. Inside was a diamond ring, brilliant, costly, and far too new to be her own. Daniel had already given her a ring years earlier, a symbol of vows that now felt like ashes. This one wasn't for her. It was for Vanessa. The realization cut deeper than any blade. Isabella's loyalty had been met not with love but with replacement. That night she confronted him. The study became a battleground of truth and lies. Isabella stood trembling, clutching the box in her hand, her voice shaking with betrayal. "Who is this for, Daniel?" she demanded, her eyes searching his face for an ounce of the man she thought she knew. Daniel stammered, his carefully rehearsed composure crumbling under the weight of his wife's fury. He denied, then confessed, then denied again, a carousel of excuses and half-truths. "It's not what you think," he shouted. But Isabella knew better. The walls that once held their love now echoed with rage, confusion, and heartbreak. And then, without warning, the lights went out. Darkness swallowed the room. Silence pressed against her ears. And in that silence, everything changed. When Isabella woke again, the world was no longer hers. Rope burns seared into her wrists, her body heavy against the cold cement floor. Chains rattled whenever she moved, cruel reminders of her captivity. The air smelled of damp stone, her breaths shallow against the chill that crept up from the floor. Somewhere above, faint music played soft, careless, almost mocking. She tried to scream, but her voice cracked, absorbed by the basement walls that had never been meant for sound to escape. Isabella was not in her bedroom, not in her sanctuary, but in the depths of the Avery mansion, imprisoned in the very home she had once believed would shelter her and her child. And while Isabella's cries went unheard, Vanessa was upstairs, wearing Isabella's robe, sipping from Isabella's favorite cup. Every move calculated, every detail a performance in erasure. Vanessa wasn't just taking Daniel. She was taking Isabella's life piece by piece, as though wearing her skin would finally cement her victory. To anyone looking in from the outside, it might have seemed like a simple change, a woman in a silk robe, enjoying a quiet night. But to Isabella, chained below, the sound of Vanessa's laughter was the cruelest torture. It meant that her existence had been overwritten, her presence replaced, as if she had never mattered at all. From the basement, Isabella could hear footsteps above her head, heavy at times, light at others. She could almost map their movements, the scrape of a chair, the click of a cup being set down, the soft creak of Daniel's study door. Each sound painted a picture of a life still moving, a life she had been cut out of. And then, within her own body, she felt the undeniable kick of her unborn child, a reminder that she was not just fighting for herself, but for the life inside her. The baby's movements clashed with the rattle of the chain at her wrists, a cruel symphony of innocence and imprisonment. It was in those moments that Vanessa began her whispers. Not face to face, not even in the basement. She leaned against the polished wooden floors above and let her words seep down through the cracks, dripping into Isabella's prison like poison. "The house feels better without her energy," Vanessa murmured, her voice low, almost playful. Isabella froze. She wasn't imagining it. Vanessa knew she was there, and worse, she wanted Isabella to know she was there. The whispers weren't just taunts. They were declarations of victory. And while Isabella sat chained in silence, Vanessa walked freely above, weaving herself into the fabric of Isabella's world, drinking from her cups, wearing her clothes, occupying her spaces. She wasn't just stealing a husband, she was rewriting a life, replacing Isabella in every way that mattered. And perhaps the cruelest part? Daniel was too blind to see it, or perhaps too weak to admit it. Because at that very moment, Daniel sat just upstairs, staring at Isabella's photo on his phone. Her smile, her eyes. He thought she had left him, but she was chained just below his feet. From the outside, the Avery mansion looked undisturbed. The gardens manicured, the iron gates closed, the windows glowing faintly at night. But inside, Daniel's world was collapsing. Vanessa, ever poised and convincing, slipped easily into her role as the grieving wife of a man whose marriage had fallen apart. She sat beside Daniel on the leather couch, her hand resting gently on his shoulder, her voice dripping with concern. "She's gone, Daniel," Vanessa whispered. "Isabella couldn't handle the pressure. You know she wasn't strong enough. Maybe the baby wasn't even yours." The words sliced through him. Daniel's once proud posture slumped. He reached for the whiskey decanter, pouring glass after glass, drowning not just in alcohol but in doubt. Every sip blurred the line between truth and manipulation. He wanted to believe Isabella had left, that it explained her absence, her silence, the emptiness of the home. But deep inside, a question lingered. Why had she left her shoes by the door? Because they were still there. The red flats Isabella wore almost daily sat neatly by the entryway. Her laundry remained folded in the corner of the bedroom. And on the coat rack, her scarf, a soft cream-colored scarf she had worn during their last evening walk together, still hung, untouched. Daniel saw these things and looked away. Vanessa had given him permission to ignore them, to rewrite reality in a way that required no investigation, no confrontation. Weakness wrapped him tighter than any chain, but not everyone in the mansion was so blind. Lucia, the housekeeper, had worked in the Avery home for more than 20 years. She had watched Daniel grow from a young man into the polished millionaire he had become. She knew Isabella's rhythms, her habits, the way she folded her sweaters, the scent of her perfume that still lingered faintly in the upstairs hall. And to her, Isabella's sudden disappearance felt wrong, deeply wrong. It began with the noises, faint, irregular sounds at night. At first she thought it was the house settling, or perhaps rats in the basement walls. But then, one evening, while placing linens in the pantry, Lucia heard something else, a tapping. Quiet, deliberate, almost like Morse code. She froze, set down the linens, pressed her ear to the pantry vent. A whisper, barely audible, slipped through the grate. "Help. Please." Lucia's heart pounded. Her eyes darted around, but no one was near. Slowly, cautiously, she whispered back, "Isabella." 2 weak taps answered from the darkness below. Lucia staggered back, her hand covering her mouth. Isabella was alive and hidden somewhere inside the mansion. Over the next days, their secret communication began. Each night after Vanessa retired to Daniel's room, Lucia returned to the pantry vent. She brought scraps of food, a heel of bread, a small apple, bits of cheese wrapped in a napkin, lowering them carefully through a narrow crack in the vent. A small flask of water followed. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep Isabella breathing, enough to keep hope alive. And with each exchange, Lucia passed not just food, but information. She told Isabella what was happening upstairs, how Daniel was unraveling, how Vanessa was slipping into her place, how the staff had been told Isabella had chosen to leave. Every detail fueled Isabella's will to survive. But then came the revelation that made Isabella's blood run cold. One night, as Lucia leaned close to the vent, her voice trembling, she whispered the truth she had carried in silence for years. "Vanessa hasn't just stolen Daniel. Years ago she was engaged to his brother Michael." Isabella's breath caught. Michael, the brother who had drowned mysteriously during a late-night boating trip, the death that had nearly destroyed the Avery family. Lucia's final words pierced like ice. That accident wasn't an accident. Vanessa was there. Lucia had always been careful with her duties, polishing silver, arranging flowers, ironing Daniel's shirts with quiet precision. But one afternoon, as she cleaned the old study at the back of the mansion, she stumbled upon something that froze her in place. A box. Dust-covered, tucked behind rows of ledgers and forgotten photographs. Inside were letters. Letters written by Michael, Daniel's brother, in the weeks before his death. Lucia unfolded the fragile paper, her hands trembling as she read. The words were confessions, warnings, almost pleas for help. "Vanessa isn't who she seems," one letter said. "She whispers things at night, threats I can't ignore. She says if I betray her, I'll never see another sunrise." Lucia's breath quickened. She read another, and another, each one darker than the last. Michael had feared her. He had wanted to end the engagement. He had written of his plans to escape. But he never did. And Isabella, chained below in the basement, listened in horror as Lucia read the words softly through the vent. Suddenly the pattern was clear. Vanessa wasn't just the other woman. She wasn't just temptation. She was a predator, a woman who had destroyed one brother, and now sought to consume the other. Her game had been playing out for years, and Isabella was never meant to be part of it. But then came a discovery that changed everything. While cleaning Daniel's private office, Lucia found another hidden envelope, this one tucked inside a hollow drawer of the desk. Inside was a document, crisp and legal. A copy of the family's estate plan, the will. And on the final page, beneath the neat black type, Isabella's name stood in sharp relief. The document revealed that if anything ever happened to Daniel, Isabella would inherit half the estate, wealth, property, control of the Avery legacy. It wasn't just jealousy driving Vanessa. It wasn't just obsession. It was money, power, the dynasty. Vanessa wanted it all, and Isabella was the single obstacle standing in her way. Desperation gave Isabella courage. One night, while Vanessa slept, Lucia slipped her phone through the vent, a lifeline, a final chance. With trembling hands, Isabella typed a message she knew only Daniel would understand. "Still waiting for the blue velvet robe. It's cold in the basement." That robe had been a private gift from Daniel years ago, something only he and Isabella shared. A message wrapped in code. Proof she was still alive. But fate twisted cruelly. The next morning, as the phone buzzed on the nightstand, Vanessa reached for it first. Her painted nails curled around the device. She glanced at the screen, read the message once, then twice. Her lips parted, and the faintest smile tugged at the corners before vanishing into something else. Rage. Her grip tightened around the phone until her knuckles whitened. She understood. Isabella wasn't gone. She wasn't erased. She was beneath them, waiting. Vanessa's expression hardened into something terrifying. That night she slipped a small vial from her vanity drawer, a glass container filled with a colorless, fine powder. She poured it carefully into the lining of her clutch, her movements precise, deliberate. Vanessa wasn't planning to wait any longer. The mansion was silent that night, but inside Isabella's heart, chaos thundered. She lay weak, her wrists raw from the iron cuffs, whispering broken prayers into the cold air. Her child shifted restlessly inside her, each kick sharper, more urgent, as though the baby itself understood that danger was descending. Above her, Vanessa's footsteps echoed. Calm, unhurried, measured. In her hand, the clutch, and inside, the vial of powder. She paused at the basement door, slid the old brass key into the lock, slowly turned it. The sound of tumblers shifting filled the dark stairwell like a death knell. At the same time, Daniel sat upstairs, restless. His drink sat untouched for once. His mind, clouded for weeks by Vanessa's poisonous whispers, began to clear, haunted by fragments of Isabella's voice, her scent still lingering in the halls, the feeling she had never left. And then, he heard it, a faint sound from the pantry vent. Scratching, scraping, almost like fingernails against metal. He leaned closer, and in the dim light, his eyes widened. Words, carved into the vent. Desperate, jagged letters. "I'm not gone." Daniel's chest tightened. His heart slammed against his ribs. His world flipped in a single breath. Isabella wasn't gone. She was here, trapped, crying out beneath his feet. Panic surged through him. He rose so suddenly his chair toppled, clattering across the hardwood. His footsteps pounded down the hallway toward the basement door. Parallel. Vanessa descending slowly, her heels tapping against the concrete steps, her voice dripping venom into the darkness. Vanessa, whispering. "It's time to say goodbye, Isabella." Chains rattled as Isabella tried to push herself upright. Her lips moved, but no sound came, only a whispered plea for her child to hold on. The basement light flickered. Shadows stretched across the walls. And then Daniel appeared at the doorway. For a moment, time stopped. He saw it all. His wife, chained, bruised, gaunt but alive. Her eyes filled with terror and love all at once. The woman he thought had abandoned him, suffering just below his feet. Something primal ignited inside him. Rage exploded. He lunged forward, his body colliding with Vanessa's as she turned, shock flashing across her face. The clutch slipped from her hand, crashing to the floor. The vial shattered. White dust scattered across the concrete. Daniel roared, shoving Vanessa back. His hands tore at the chains that bound Isabella, ripping the iron until his palms bled. He pulled, twisted, fought with everything inside him, and finally, the lock gave way. Isabella collapsed into his arms. Daniel cradled her, trembling. "Daniel," voice breaking. "Forgive me. My God, forgive me." But Vanessa wasn't finished. She clawed forward, her face twisted with fury, screaming that Isabella had ruined everything. The commotion drew Lucia, who burst into the hallway, her own screams piercing the night. Moments later, flashing lights illuminated the driveway. The police stormed the mansion, drawn by the chaos by Lucia's desperate call for help. Vanessa was dragged away, still hissing like a cornered predator. Her glamorous facade shattered, her mask gone. Daniel held Isabella close as paramedics rushed in, chains finally falling away from her wrists. Isabella survived. The baby survived. But scars remained. Not just on her body, but etched deep in her soul. She had lived in the shadows of betrayal, chained beneath the very home built to protect her. And Daniel, once the charming millionaire who allowed himself to be blinded by vanity and weakness, would never again be the same man. He had seen what lies and silence could cost. He had nearly lost everything. Vanessa wanted more than a man. She wanted a dynasty. She stole Michael, silencing him before he could expose her. She nearly destroyed Daniel, twisting his love, turning his loyalty into blindness. And she almost erased Isabella, the woman who carried his child, the rightful heir, the only true heart in that entire house of shadows. But in the end, Vanessa's web of lies collapsed in the very place she thought her victory was secure. The basement. The basement that held not only Isabella's broken body, but the truth. The evidence. The whispers of Michael's letters. The scratches in the vent. The chains that rattled louder than her silence ever could. Daniel's rage saved his wife. Isabella's courage saved her child. And Vanessa? Her story ended in handcuffs. Her empire of illusions dismantled in one night. If Daniel hadn't opened that basement door, how long would Vanessa's story have lasted? And how many lives would she have consumed next? Do you think Vanessa planned Michael's death too? Or was it really an accident, as she claimed? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you thought this story was chilling, wait until you hear what happened in our next case. Subscribe now and tap the bell icon so you don't miss the moment the next secret is revealed.